I am so super ecstatic to be able to present our presenter for today, colleague and I think I can say good friend now, Dr. Gail Gorky. And if you haven't heard of Dr. Gail Gorky before, you will be chatting about her after today. And those of you that know her, she's been in the field for many years. I don't want to say the exact, but a long time, very experienced, and I believe, especially in the field with working with students with special needs, right? And so I know I've attended some trainings that you've had on that, but aside from that, she's well renowned for her work. She's been on a TED Talk, so Google it after this if you haven't
Yeah.
seen that. That's very
And go
engaging.
like this. Don't do this. Make sure you Google it. Okay.
And they will go like this
Go
because
like this. Yes.
it's
Okay.
that good. But after you leave today, I think that you'll learn a lot from her. I learned so much from her every time I listen to any of her presentations. And there's so much that I can say, but I won't because our time is limited. So quickly, I'm going to introduce Dr. Gail Gorky.
Very cool. Hey. So first of all, I have to share my shirt. I don't know if you guys noticed my shirt. In honor of women, these are the Supremes. Okay. These are the Supreme Court justices. So it's stop in the name of law. These gals set precedent. Think it over. No, never mind. So I had to do this in honor of women and women that are, making a difference in the world. So here they are, the Supremes. We got a lot. Elena, Sandra, Ruth, and Sonia. So there they are, the Supremes. Okay. So today we're going to talk about dealing with conflict and finding a way to agree to disagree. And Da Vinci said this about learning. He said that it's the only thing that our mind never exhausts, it never fears, and it never regrets. And so today I want you guys to be able to experience some things that'll help you just to learn to get along with others and hopefully teach others to get along with them as well. And it would be nice if I could change how you feel. But the problem is the limbic part of the brain, the part where our feelings are generated from, operates 80,000 times faster than our thoughts. 80,000 times faster. That's why when people say, "Why do you feel that way?" You say, "I don't know," because you don't know yet. Your thoughts haven't caught up to the feelings. And so, one of the things that's so powerful about this is that if the feelings come so quickly, in order to get people to change how they feel, we can't do that. In fact, you can barely control how you feel. And so, what we want to do is we want to change how people think. But it's really hard to do that. So one of the other ways we can help change the feelings is to get them to do something differently. And so you can come at feelings from both directions, changing what they think and changing what they do. And so I want you to consider part of why we have some of the issues we have with getting along with such a diverse culture and so many of the things that get in our way or sometimes cause us to have conflict. And I want you to think about culture like an iceberg, okay? And when we look at an iceberg, we only see like the top 15%, like 85% of it's under the water. And the things that we see, and one of the things about being human is we're very sight oriented. From the very beginning, we are looking at things that come into our lives like, is that dangerous? Is that something I need to pay attention to? And so we're very sight oriented. And so when you look at things that are above the surface, the 15% that's visible, physical features, the clothing they wear, some of the customs you see, the food, the language, the gender, the way they communicate, all of those things are things that we can see above. And yet, so many of the issues we have with culture and the places where we find disagreements come in the stuff that's under the water, the 85% that's below the surface. And those would be our assumptions, our beliefs, our values, the way we see things, the way our family structure operates and the roles we play in that, our politics, which has been like a crazy one for the last couple of years, habits, and then our social status. And so a lot of these things influence us, create our biases, our prejudices, our stereotypes, but it's not necessarily something we see when we first look at an individual. And so, one of the things I want you to recognize is that when you're looking at the content of culture, these values, beliefs, expectations, the roles, the social status that we have, the family structure, the way that people are socialized. There's always been that, question, is it nature or is it nurture? And the answer is yes, it is both nature, biologically who you are, and nurture, who you are raised with in the community that you're a part of. And tomorrow, when I get a chance to talk a little bit about moral leadership, we'll talk a little bit more about what that does for us and how those early kinds of choices and things that happen in us shape us in our lives toward our decisions about what we believe to be true and right and wrong. Um, the other thing is that the way that we express ourselves, the humanities and the arts. I mean, if you want to know about a culture, sing their songs, dance their dances, eat their food, wear their clothes, and see what they say is beautiful, and the way that they express themselves in the way that they communicate. So today we want to talk about biases. And biases are basically something that all of us have. And whether we're conscious of that or subconsciously, those things are a part of us. We all have biases, and they show up in a couple of ways. It could be prejudice, where we have a certain group of individuals that we, either have an affinity for, or those that we have difficulty with. There's stereotyping, which is that idea that everybody from that culture is like that. And I think that's one of the things that it's kind of hard to balance. I have Hispanic friends, and when they invite me over to the house for a party back before it was COVID, and they would say, party starts at 3:30, and I'd show up at 3:30, my Hispanic friends would be like, "Why did you come so early? Are you here to help?" Because really, it doesn't really start at 3:30. It starts later, and if you show up too early, but and that's a cultural thing. But it doesn't happen with, Hispanic families have a continuum. Latino families have a continuum of culture and ideas and concepts. There are some things that they do share in common, and we have to guard against saying, well, they're all like that, and that's what your stereotyping is like. Discrimination means that you're going to treat people differently and in a negative way based on what you're looking at, gender, race, um, where you actually treat that individual differently because of that. Racism then is one of the things, right now, if you don't think we have a problem with race in this country, chances are you're part of the problem because there's some issues that we need to resolve with this. And we pass judgment on what we see. And race is one of those things that we see very obviously. I've taught diversity and culture at the university for about 20 years. And I remember one of the conversations I had with a young African American, a black guy named John, who was just one of the neatest guys ever. And John and I talked about this compared to some of the other prejudices that we see. And he said, race is always, it's something people see right away. It's something people judge. He goes, just the other day, there was this woman, her car had broken down, and he had stopped his, college car, which is one of those that, is barely held together by the duct tape and the paint. And he went over to the window to help her. And she was like, oh, go away. And like 30 seconds later, a kid from the university, just like him, but a white kid, stopped his car, got out. The woman got out the car and allowed him to help. And the only difference between the two was that the color of their skin. And he said, I'm always black. When people see me, that's what they see. And because I was teaching about that, we can discriminate against gender and body type and all of those other things as well. And we had this wonderful discussion about when we pass judgment on what we see. And gender can do that, body type and size can do that, race can do that. And so this idea that it makes us different, and it's one of those obvious differences. Um, Scapegoating then is when you blame everybody for everything else and you don't take responsibility for what's going on. It's the problem in our societies because of this thing or that person or this group of individuals. There's also ethnocentrism, and this is when you think that yours is the best and that everybody else's is less than. And it's all about, not being able to celebrate culture. And so one of the things I want us to be able to do is to move beyond tolerance. Tolerance is our way of saying, yeah, I'm going to put up with you. And I don't really want us to tolerate. I mean, that's a beginning step, but I want us to celebrate. I want us to look at each other and think how cool it is, to know who you are, who your life, who's important in your life, the cultural things that you share, and you see that in me and learn from me, from my culture, and that together we can get as excited about each other's culture as it though it was our own. If you look up biases, cognitive biases, et cetera, if you go to, our wonderful Wikipedia, there are so many different ways that we can be biased. I went back and I looked last night. I mean, there's ways and ways. This is only 16 of them. Okay. And so I want to just briefly talk about these just really, really quickly. Okay. So an affinity bias, that means that you're favoring somebody because they share something in common with you. Okay. A conformity bias is it's linked to our desire and the things that we want, and if they want those things too, then great. If they don't, then now we're going to have a conflict. Tomorrow, when I talk a little bit again about people that conform, even when it goes against who they are, because that's what the group is doing. So that's some of those kinds of things that'll come in that. Contrast is due to the tendency that we compare things. We want it all to be the same, and we see where there's differences in that. You can have bias based on age, young, old. You can have a confirmation biases that we've made up our mind about certain things. And if you don't agree with us, then we're going to have an issue with that. The halo or horn bias, that takes place when you have one, a, it's a certain quality about somebody, and you assume that because they have that quality, everything about them is going to be good and they're going to, do everything right. Attribution bias has to do that. We tend to explain our actions in terms of circumstances. And so we look at certain ways that they behave, and we apply that to gender. And, we might say, Mary's team does good because she's a great team leader, and Robert's team wasn't good because Robert sucks at leading, that kind of thing. We give them a certain attribute. Name bias, and this is really interesting. Surnames. If you have a European surname or a Latin surname, people might be biased just by, your name. Like Barack Obama, he had some issues just because his name was not, Joe Smith. And so that idea that we can do that. Anchoring biases have to do when there's the first information piece we get about them, and then that first hit, whatever that first impression is, it kind of anchors everything else. That's the piece that we color everything else from them. Beauty, and what we determine is beautiful. If you look at some of the old IQ tests, and you could see how racially biased they were. There was one question on the old IQ test where there was a face that was obviously darker, heavier lips and things like that. And then there was the European face, which was lighter. And they asked the kid which one's pretty and which one's not. And so the idea that what constitutes beauty to us and what we see as something that's beautiful. Just color, and skin color, and even within certain races, they talk about the shades of color. One of my favorite things that happened early on and when I was teaching was they came out with multicultural crayons. It's like a box of 8, and it has all these different shades of tan and brown, because nobody's really, black, and nobody's really pink, because it was, and so they came out with multicultural crayons. And it was hilarious to me because I'd have kids color, their own faces and their different things. And I would have kids from different races that used the same color, the same crayon, because it was the closest to their skin color. And for them to realize that there's a variety of skin color across all races. It was one of my favorite things about that. There's an overconfidence bias, a height bias. Overconfidence means that you just think that you're best at this, and it's kind of a, so you just assume you're going to do well, and then you end up not. Similarity, gender. The last one then would be benevolence, and this is where, because we're trying so hard to care for that person, we take away their opportunity to choose. And that's a really unique bias, that we're so busy trying to help them that they never really learn to help themselves. So those are some basic ones. So now what I want you to do is I want you to consider your own unconscious biases. Okay. I want you to realize we all have them. So we're going to take we're going to answer some questions, and I want you to just, like, on a sheet of paper, just write your answer down. Nobody's going to see it. So, be honest, but let's see how you do with some of these. Okay. Number 1, the first question: I'm going to have to read it off the big screen because I have those 62-year-old eyes. By the way, got my first shot. Did y'all get vaccinated? Huh? Yeah. My 92-year-old mother got her second shot yesterday, so we're working on it. Okay, question number 1. A group of researchers in America sent 2 fictional job applications to 127 professors for a position as a laboratory manager. Both candidates were 22 years of age, had the same grades, same references. The only difference was one was called John and the other was called Jennifer. Can you guess what happened? Okay, so here's your choices. 1, Jennifer was more likely to be hired. 2, John was more likely to be hired. Or 3, both of them were likely to be hired, with the same starting salary. So which would you say? Jennifer was more likely to be hired with a lower starting salary. John was likely to be hired with a higher starting salary, or they were going to be hired equally. Okay, number 2. Question number 2. Economists have found that the best looking people make on average during their lifetime a lot more money than less attractive people. Is that true or false? This one's an easy one. True or false? If you're good looking, you make more money. Okay, question number 3. In America, only about 14.5% of men are estimated to have this attribute. However, almost 60% of the CEOs in the Fortune 500 companies have it. What is the attribute? Is it A, a college degree, B, a standing height of over 6 feet tall, or an IQ of above 130? What would be the determining factor out of those 3? Okay, question number 4. You guys doing all right? Okay, here we go. Question number 4. A British study found that job applications with British sounding names received 24% positive response rate from employers. What positive response rate did candidates with the same resume, the same CV, but they had non-British names? What percentage of them got a positive one? 24%, 20%, or 15%? Based on just their names, which one do you think it is? Question number 5. What percentage of hiring managers in the UK admit to a negative bias towards individuals with certain regional accents? And if you know anything about the UK, about Britain, you can tell where somebody's from based on their accent. We have that also in the United States. Y'all coming from some way in the South, you might have, or you might be from the guy in New York, and he's talking really fast, and he's talking about the birds chirping in the trees. Okay, yeah, or you could do the California, dude, cowabunga, let's catch a hairball with our, baggies. Okay. All right. So what's a percentage of hiring managers that admitted a bias toward that with certain accents? 10%, 80%, or 30%? Okay. Number 6. We're almost there. You guys are doing good. Number 6, giving a job to a candidate you clicked with because you had the same school or a same interest or hobbies is not an unconscious bias, especially if they're different than you. So if you clicked with someone, is this a true or a false statement? Is this an unconscious bias or not, that you have something in common with this individual? Okay. Number 7. There's only 10, so we're almost there. Number 7. If you perceive a colleague who is working flexible hours as lazy, it is not an unconscious bias if later they avoid some responsibilities. Is this a true or a false statement? Is there an unconscious bias? Number 8. If one of your employees returns from maternity leave, and is it an unconscious bias to spare her the trouble of going on business trips or taking on extra responsibilities simply because she just had a baby? Is that true or false? Is that an unconscious bias? Okay, that's a short one. Everybody has unconscious biases, true or false? And number 10, we can only have unconscious biases toward people who are different than us, true or false? All right, you guys ready? All right, here's the questions. I'm going to give you the answers. According to Yale, the dude got hired at a higher salary. So that should have been the answer. Okay. Number two, good looking people make an average of over $250,000 more than people that are not so attractive, according to the cultural standards of beauty. Okay. So depending on the culture that you're in. In America, only 14.5% of the men have the attribute. The attribute is they are tall. Isn't that interesting? Most of the CEOs of the 500 countries, the guys are over 6 foot tall. So height matters. Okay. Okay. Number four, the British names had a more positive response. The answer was C, 15%. If your name isn't the right name sounding or spelled the right way or whatever, you're going to have issues. Number five, what percentage of hiring managers admit to negative biases toward that? More than 80% of them say that the way that individual sounds, because we know they come from a certain region or a certain part of the country, that they passed a judgment based on the way that they sounded. Also, there's some people that sometimes don't get hired because they have an accent. And it doesn't mean that they're not capable and they don't have, but because they have this accent and they sound a certain way, um, that's going to be part of your problem. Okay. Um, the other thing is going to be about, so what, are we six? Are we on six? Yeah. So giving the candidate to somebody that clicked with you is absolutely an unconscious bias. You absolutely, that's a bias. If it's something that you share in common with, you're like, I like this guy because he does the same thing I do. That's going to be a bias. Okay. Number seven, if you perceive a colleague who's working flexible hours, they're lazy, that's also, it's not an unconscious bias. It absolutely is an unconscious bias, because you're like, well, they're just, they're just showing up whenever they want to, and they're doing whatever they want when they want to do it. And sometimes that's not the case. Um, One of your employees returns from maternity leave. If you're going out of your way, well, she was pregnant, so we have to, that's an unconscious bias also. Number nine, everybody has them. Absolutely true. And number 10, we can only have them from people that are different than us. And that's not true. We have them with everyone. So we're equally unbiased with everyone. That's equity. Okay. All right. So I don't know how you did, but I want you to understand that, biases come in all kinds of shapes, sizes, and everybody has them. So part of what we need to do is learn how to see past those things. We might have an initial response and we need to slow ourselves down, look at it differently. The other thing is we need to teach our kids to do the same. We will judge based on what we see, it's what we do. Okay. So I want you to understand that that doesn't necessarily mean we can't get things done. Some people think that if you have a group where the opinions are polar, they're very passionate about their belief systems, and those systems are really, really separated. A lot of people assume if that's the case, you can't get anything done. You're not going to be able to be effective. And there were two very powerful studies that were done recently. The first one was a group, and they did this on the nature of human behavior. And they had people that had really polarizing ideas. And what they discovered was if those individuals were polarized in their belief system, but they were willing to work with each other, they actually had a more positive influence on the quality of their productivity. They had other options and other ideas. They had a more collaborative way to work at things because they saw the perspective from these broader terms. Okay. A second one was done up in Stanford, and they put 532 registered voters that were very, very polar, extreme right, extreme left, Dems and Republicans. And they put them together in a weekend. Now, the only requirement they had was that they would be willing to listen to the other side and have those kinds of tough conversations. And what they discovered was there were dramatic changes in the opinions when people were willing to sit in a room, have those conversations, talk about the differences and the things that where they might see things differently. And they actually came up with better solutions. And they talked about things like climate. They talked about things like immigration, all of the hot spots that we have in our politics. And what we discovered is if you put people in the room that do that, they're going to come together with better solutions. And so this was um, this was one of the things that was so powerful about that, that both groups began to see the other side and were willing to find a way to solve that conflict. So the thing about having those two characteristics, one, the thing about knowing what you believe and why you believe it means there's passion there. Two, you need to be willing to hear the other side. So people that are passionate, they care about the ideas, they're diligent, they research, they listen to stuff, they take time to develop an informed opinion. It's something they've actually thought about, spent some time with, and they have a tendency to persevere. They have a tendency to hold on to those things because they've spent so much time with it and they understand the value of it for themselves. It also helps them be a little resilient when somebody might come up against what they believe, they would be able to stand up for that a little more readily. Now, that's great, but without the value of being willing, this can sometimes cause conflict. So the goal is to have people that are passionate, have opinions, know why they believe what they believe, but then add to it this willingness factor. And the willingness factor means, one, they got to be willing to be open and want to collaborate. Okay. Collaboration is the only way that you get a win-win situation. A compromise is a little win, a little lose. You got to give a little to get a little. Collaboration is the only way you both walk away with what you want. And so they have to be willing to do that. Number two, they have to sometimes take a little bit of a sacrifice for the team. They got to realize that, well, I know that isn't exactly how I want it to be, but if we can get this done, then I'm willing to make that choice. They have to be willing to follow leadership. And tomorrow, when I talk about that piece of that moral compass that we need to have if we're going to be the kind of leaders that people follow, how important it is that the leadership we follow is making good decisions and right decisions and moral choices for us. So I have to be willing to follow the leadership. I have to be willing to try something new. I have to be able to suspend my disbelief and say, yeah, I know I never tried that before. I don't know if that's going to work, but hey, I'm willing. Let's try it. Number four is or five is you got to be willing to contribute. You got to be willing to offer up some ideas, put it out there, and realize that it might take some adjustment and it might not look exactly the same way as you started with it because other people's influence, but the idea that you contribute. And I know that in the introduction, my buddy Lisa said I do a lot of work with kids that have disabilities. And I call them various abilities because I think we all have stuff we're good at and all stuff we suck at. Um, and that's part of that. But to me, inclusion is one word: contribution. You don't feel included until you get a chance to contribute. And when you can say, hey, look, this is what I did and this is how I can do it. And so the goal then in the team is to allow people to share, contribute, and feel like they have something valuable to offer. The last piece then in that is that the ultimate goal is, how do we fix what's broken? There has to be a willingness to not work the person, but work the problem and not make it personal. And so that's kind of where that's at. And there's things that get in the way of us trying to do those kinds of things. Um, if we don't feel like we can express our opinions, we can't be honest about how we feel. If we can't share information and have the opportunity to maybe justify and explain why those things feel the way they do, um, you have to be able to openly talk about problems, not hide and run from them and be on that river in Egypt, denial. You can't go to the denial place. People have to be willing to take a few risks. You got to shut down the stuff that's not productive, all the gossip and all those communication things that get in the way of that. The other thing is you have to develop trust. You have to be someone people can trust. And trust, there's four things you have to have. One, you have to be reliable. I have to know that you're going to be the same every time I come to see you. I'm going to know that you're going to behave a certain way and that I can, if I never know who I'm going to get when I open the door, it's not somebody that I can trust. The other thing is that I have to feel like you accept me, like you are willing to recognize who I am, what I have to offer, and that I feel a place of acceptance. That openness, again, is going to show up. The idea that I don't have all the answers. I might have some good ones. You might have some good ones. And maybe the one that we have together is going to be the best one. And then the last part is the ability to speak truth and to be willing to tell people that. And again, tomorrow I'm going to share some things about the value of being someone who knows the truth and speaks the truth and how straightforwardness is so important to that. I'm going to run a 3-minute video for you right now. This is one of my favorite TED Talks. 3 minutes. This guy's Derek Sivers. And this is how you start a movement. Okay. If you want to find it, you go to TED, you look up the shirtless dancing guy, and you'll find this video. Okay. You guys ready? Here's a 3-minute video. Everybody watch. All right. Make sure your volume's up. Thumbs up, you can hear. Okay. Here we go.
So ladies and gentlemen, at TED we talk a lot about leadership and how to make a movement. So let's watch a movement happen, start to finish, in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons from it. First, of course you know, a leader needs the guts to stand out and be ridiculed. But what he's doing is so easy to follow. So here's his first follower with a crucial role. He's going to show everyone else how to follow. Now notice that the leader embraces him as an equal. So now it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Now there he is calling to his friends. Now if you notice that the first follower is actually an underestimated form of leadership in itself. It takes guts to stand out like that. The first follower is what transforms a lone nut into a leader. And here comes a second follower. Now it's not a lone nut, it's not two nuts, 3 is a crowd, and a crowd is news. So a movement must be public. It's important to show not just the leader, but the followers, because you find that new followers emulate the followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, and immediately after, 3 more people. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point. Now we've got a movement. So notice that as more people join in, it's less risky. So those that were sitting on the fence before now have no reason not to. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, but they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. So over the next minute, you'll see all of the those that prefer to stick with the crowd, because eventually they would be ridiculed for not joining in. And that's how you make a movement. But let's recap some lessons from this. So first, if you are the type, like the shirtless dancing guy, that is standing alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals. So it's clearly about the movement, not you. Okay, but we might have missed the real lesson here. The biggest lesson, if you noticed, did you catch it? Is that leadership is over-glorified. That yes, it was the shirtless guy was first, and he'll get all the credit, but it was really the first follower that transformed the lone nut into a leader. So as we're told that we should all be leaders, that would be really ineffective. If you really care about starting a movement, have the courage to follow and show others how to follow. And when you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first one to stand up and join in. And what a perfect place to do that at TED.
Okay. So there we go. The first follower, the first one to jump in there and be a part of that. So the idea that we show others how to follow by the way that we are willing to follow. Remember, part of that willingness list was the willingness to follow the leadership, to go in the direction that it needs to go, recognizing what work is trying to be done, the movement that you're trying to have. If you are not familiar with Castle, you need to become familiar with Castle. Castle's probably one of the best online things for social emotional learning. And if we're getting anything from parents right now, it's that our kids are not getting the kind of social emotional stuff that they need. The beauty of Castle is they look at these 5 areas and they have great activities. They have great ideas for how to encourage those things in your kids and yourself as well, because you can't give them what you don't own yourself. So you got to kind of do it for you too. And there's a series of skills that are listed under each of those categories. And so the idea that you become the kind of person that has those social emotional competence, and you have the kind of abilities then to be able to work well with others and reach that point of collaboration. The other thing I need you to develop right off the bat is that we need to talk less and listen more. We got 2 of these and 1 of these, and we should do twice as much listening as we do talking. And that's hard for me. I don't know about you. And there's a handful of people in my life that are outstanding listeners, and I love them for that, because I get a chance to talk to them and they let me sort through my ideas and things like that. So I'm going to give you some stuff on being a good listener. The first thing about it is you have to be active in the way that you listen, and that's going to be eye contact and body language. I mean, you can tell just by looking at someone whether they're listening to you or not. Okay. The idea that you have gestures and, yeah, and or you repeat back to that person. and you allow them to finish their thought before you jump in. The second skill, and of all the stuff I've read, this is the most important thing to tell that you're a good listener, and that's that you reflect, you reiterate, you say to them, what I hear you saying is this, and you unpack for them whatever it is they talk to you about. You've had this conversation where you've said it and hoped, oh man, that's not what I meant. You try to take it back and it's too late. It's already out there. So the idea that we want to be able to have that moment where I can say, well, what I hear you saying is this. And then you can say to me, yeah, I know that's what I said, but that's not what I meant. I meant this instead. That chance to kind of fix it before it becomes permanent. So really good listeners do reflection and reiteration. Okay. The other thing is, if you're going to have conversations in the midst of conflict, in the midst of those biases and those prejudices that we're talking about, there's three goals to that to resolve that conflict. One, you can repair what's broken. Two, you can resolve the issue and solve the problem. Or three, you take what's not working, throw it out, and put in something that works. So you can repair, resolve, or replace. And those are three really good options to deal with stuff that's hard to deal with when you have those kinds of difficult conversations. When you look at effective communication, recognize 7% of how we communicate are the words we use. 93% of what we communicate has nothing to do with the words. And all we ever think about is, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? What am I going to say? That's the least important part of the conversation. Tone is 38%. Not what you say, but how you say it. And we don't think, what's my tone going to be like when I say these words? We just think, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? What am I going to say? The other thing is, out of that, then 55% is body language. When was the last time you thought, what's my body going to look like when I have this conversation? We don't even consider this. And yet people are getting more from what your body is doing than from what your mouth is saying. And so recognizing that. The other thing you need to know about conversations is this: no matter how thin you slice it, you can slice it so thin, it's transparent. You can actually see through it and see the other side. There's still always going to be two sides to every situation, no matter how thin you slice it. Okay. And we have to recognize that because we're coming at it from different places. The other thing about understanding about communication is you'll know what you're communicating, not by what you said, but by what they heard. The key, the meaning to communication is in the response that you get. How did they respond? And if they don't respond the way you want them to, figure out a different way to say it, because the meaning is in the response. Okay. Our conflict comes for a lot of reasons. We can fight with others. We can have issues with ideas, equity, things with race. Those are all ideas. A lot of the biases we're talking about fall into that category. You can have problems with nature. Just ask the guys in Texas. Between the pandemic, no electricity, and no clean drinking water because of storms and weather. And I mean, there were pictures out of Colorado where the guys with 4x4s and chains were stuck in 4 feet of snow and had to vacate their vehicles. So sometimes Mother Nature shows up and makes life hard for us. And then the things that we battle with within ourselves, should I or shouldn't I, recognizing our own things, rumors, arguments, misunderstandings, just being tired. There's a whole lot of reasons why we would have conflict. Okay. And it can be something that's positive, it can be negative, or it can actually have no effect whatsoever. The last couple of things I'm going to talk about is this: you can deny that there's a problem, you can confront, but the problem with confrontation is if they ain't ready for it, that's going to be a waste of your time and energy. And then the last one is problem solving. And this is obviously the best way to resolve our conflict. And if you want 6 steps on how to do it, here's 6. I prefer 4. This is how I teach conflict resolution. What's the problem? What are your choices? Pick one. Did it work? What's the problem? What are your choices? Pick one. Did it work? If it worked, you're good. If it doesn't, go back to number 1. We still have a problem. What's another choice? And so I teach a really basic problem solving thing. The other thing is it can be resolved one of 5 ways. You can collaborate, you can compromise, you can accommodate, you can control, you can avoid. And this is what I was telling you, this concept of win-win. The only win-win is a collaboration. If you accommodate, somebody loses and somebody else wins. If you control, you win and they lose. If you just walk away, you both lose. And a compromise is a mini win, mini lose. And we think compromise is the best place to go. And it really isn't the most effective way. The most effective way is to collaborate. But you gotta have passion and you gotta be willing. Okay. You can also tell about what somebody wants by the kinds of language that they use. And they're either going to be focused on the task or the people. They're either going to be passive or they're going to be aggressive. Okay. And so if they're going to get it right, they're focusing on the task and they're going to be passive. If they're going to get along, they're focusing on the people and they're going to be passive. If they want to get it done, they're on the task and they're being very aggressive about that. If they want to get appreciated, then they're going to be aggressive, but they're going to focus on making sure people get credit. Okay. I'm going to skip through a couple of these slides because you don't need it. I got a whole thing on the difference between assertive and aggressive, but I want you to do one other activity with me before we make a change. Okay. You don't have to change everything. 1 degree. If you take a line and you run it parallel and you make a 1 degree change, it doesn't seem like much in the beginning, but if you give it time, it'll run its course and the change will become better and better and better. So I want you to consider, so this, we got like just a couple more minutes, but I want you to consider this book on selfie. Dr. Michelle Borba is an internationally known speaker on violence and bullying in public schools, public and private schools. She believes the reason our kids have this kind of issue is because they don't know how to be empathetic. And so she believes there's 9 steps in becoming somebody who's empathetic and being able to do that. And in the book, each chapter deals with each of these steps. It's written toward parents, but what we do is one step away from parenting anyway. And so there's some great activities for each of these to try to give you those literacy, be literate in all of these. When things go in Gorky's head, they come out a little different on the other side. And what I noticed about the 9 steps is I saw 3 sets. 1, emotional literacy, perspective taking, and practicing kindness. These are all skills that we have to be able to do when we work with others. Okay. This is an interpersonal stuff. And then we have 3 that deal with morality, which is why tomorrow's thing is so powerful. It's because we have to have a moral identity. We have to know right from wrong. We have to have moral imagination. What would happen if we could get the world to do this thing? We have to have moral courage because we got to stand up for what is the right thing to do, which is the title of the thing tomorrow. Do it, the right thing. The last set then is all again some of those things dealing with my own self and the intrapersonal skills of being able to self-regulate, being able to work well with others, and being able to lead in a way that takes people in the right direction. So I want you to take this one quick last bit. We got a couple minutes. We're doing all right. So I know you're panicked, but we're all right. I want you to consider emotional literacy. Now, I'm going to give you the 7 emotions that are universal emotions. All cultures have them. Okay. Now, these are some expressions are macro. You can tell by looking. But the other problem is sometimes it's an expression that's a combination. These are all surprise, but she's surprised for different reasons. Does that make sense? And that's a pretty obvious way. You can tell when she's happy, when she's sad, when she's mad. Okay. The other problem is sometimes they're micro. If you look at this young lady's face, these are all different expressions, but it's so subtle that if you're not paying attention, you might miss those changes. Okay. And facial expressions are so important for us in the way that we communicate. There's a whole bunch of ways that we use them to help people understand what we're trying to say and how we're trying to get our point across. So I need you to, on your paper, write down these 7 emotions. Okay. Surprise, sadness, anger, contempt, happiness, disgust, and fear. And these are the 7 universal facial expressions. So we're going to see how well you do. I'm going to show you a picture. When I show you picture number 1, put it next to what you think it is. If it looks mad to you, then anger is picture number 1. Okay. So you're going to number 1 through 7, and you're going to put it next to which one you think it is. You guys ready? Here we go. Picture number 1. What is this young lady feeling? Based on those 7. Number 2. How about this young lady? What's she thinking? Dude, what's on your mind? This is number 3. Here comes number 4. What's this guy thinking? What's going on in his life, right? All right. How about number 5? My goodness. Number 6. And last but not least, number 7. There you go. Now here we go. There's happy and surprise and contempt and sadness, and it's all better if you look at them all at the same time. Okay. If you look at them all at the same time, then you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And a lot of people, they have a problem with contempt and disgust. And one of the things that I'm going to give you is a description of this. The key is that you see how the gal with disgust, everything's kind of, she's curled the lip and everything's kind of drawn to the center of the face. That's how you know disgust from contempt. Contempt is like, yeah, right, whatever. But that's it. So if you had them correct, then this is what you had on your thing. Okay, there you go. How'd you do? That's got a little dance there. Adriana got it. Ooh, ooh. Okay, so she's emotional literate. Now here, this is the thing that's really interesting. Have you guys been in grocery stores and you're like, I'm smiling. I'm smiling, but because half our face is gone because of mask wearing, this lady, Mary Beth Hefner, she was the one that during the Ebola crisis realized that people saw people coming into the room looking like space invaders. And she was the first one to laminate pictures and put them on the front. And now that's carried into the things that we're doing with those that are hospitalized because of COVID, because it's too frightening not to be able to see somebody else's face and being able to recognize that facial emotion. So this is so important, and I know we have to be physically distant, but I don't need us to be socially distant. I don't like that term. Let's just say let's keep it some distance from each other, physical distance, but doggone it, you still got to be connected to each other. And thank goodness for virtual stuff because we'd have none of that. All right. So I'm going to skip this. We're coming to the last part of our thing. I'm going to give you a bunch of stuff on anger because this is probably one of the emotions that's the most difficult to deal with. Reasons behind our anger. I'm going to give you the 10 ways to deal with it from the Mayo Clinic. So that's all part of the handout on it. It's actually a way for you to measure your anger. There's techniques that are there and ways to fix that. I'm going to give you that. There's a whole piece on forgiveness because it's really important that we let it go. Let it go. Otherwise, we get bitter and frustrated. I love this one. If you're seeing this stuff happen towards you, this is what they're trying to do. If you're feeling irritated, they want your attention. If you're feeling powerless, they want control. If you're feeling hurt, they were hurt, and this is revenge. And if you're feeling discouraged, it's because they want you to leave them alone. They want you to quit. Okay. One other thing. I'm going to give you my book notes. This is a book I read during COVID, which I was looking to be a little happier. And it talks about how our brain is designed to be negative. And Rick Hansen has this great acronym, HEAL, HEAL. You're going to have the experience, you're going to enrich it, absorb it, and link it. And that we're basically negative people. That's how our brain functions. But in order to make sure that you can change that, it's like lighting the fire, adding the fuel, sitting around and getting the warmth and being able to burn it into our memories so that it stays with us. The last step takes up like 9 chapters in the book. Each of the first 3 steps get 1 chapter. The hardest thing is how do we change that negative thought and make it positive? And that's what biases do. We have this negative feeling. We want to make it more positive. In order to do that, you have to keep the positive and the negative in at the same time. You can't let the negative hijack. You can't get caught up in the negative. And eventually, you have to do this so often that every time you think the negative, the positive shows up and eventually will reroute the brain. Remember, your memory is dynamic. It changes. It changes a little bit at a time, step by step. That's how it's developed. That's how it's going to be changed. Okay. Last thing, how do you see things? Your perception and your perspective. I need you to consider, where do you get your perspectives? I need you to consider how you believe what you believe and why you believe what you believe. And if you make a slight change, each of these photos, this is DeWitt Jones. He was a photographer for a National Geographic. The first picture was the one he took on the bottom. Then he walked into the forest, changed his perspective, and took the second picture. Changed everything. Okay. Same thing here. Drove by the field, beautiful yellow flowers, came back 3 days later, all the flowers are gone. He thought he missed his chance for a great photo, went out into the field, laid on his back, turned his camera in another perspective, and he took the second picture. There was always a place to do better. This one is about timing. Exact same spot, but one was taken slightly later than the other, and it changed everything about that perspective. Okay. And then the last one, joy comes in a moment. The kid is like, I don't know what that is. Oh my God, that's great. And we need to make sure that we make that change. Okay. So you're going to get the PowerPoint and PDF form. You're going to get some cool handouts to go with this. If you want to stay in touch with me, here's my stuff. Other than that, thank you so much for your time. I'm probably over by a couple of minutes because I talk a lot. But anyway. All right.